Hello everyone. It's so exciting seeing everyone joining from, around the world really. People from Hungary, California coming up, snowy Minneapolis. Well, hello from wet, windy, horrible England from me, really. And it's the same for you, right, Anthony? But no, thank you so much for joining us. I should introduce myself. I'm Lucy Foley, author of books such as The Paris Apartment and The Guest List. And I have the very, very great privilege today of interviewing the fabulous Anthony Horowitz. I'd like to thank Barnes & Noble for the opportunity to interview one of my all-time literary heroes. I'm going to try not to be an embarrassing superfan here. And Anthony, thank you for trusting me with this. Anthony has had the most, and has the most prolific, illustrious, varied career. I mean, the career that I as an author would dream of, any author, I think. And it is a huge honour to be talking to Anthony on US publication day of his extraordinary murder mystery, A Twist of the Knife. I think I'm right in saying that. It's US pub day.
It is today. That's absolutely correct. Yes.
Congratulations. Fabulous. Have you had a
Before we go too much further, Lucy, I've got to say how excited I am to be interviewed by a writer as amazing and talented as you are, because as you know very well, I have read all three of your most recent books, Guest List, The Hunting Party, and the Paris Apartment, and you have so nailed your colours to the mast. And as you get older as a writer, it's lovely to see the new talent bursting through and doing such fantastic work. So uber fans, both of us. Isn't that going to be awful for people listening?
That is very kind. Oh God, don't know what to do with my face. Thank you. Well, I'm just going to raise that with kind of more praise, because I think we do a quick bio because there's just so much sort of magnificent stuff here. So according to your bio, Anthony, you may have committed more fictional murders than any other living author. That's just wonderful. Working across books, TV, film, plays, and journalism. Anthony has had several instant New York Times bestsellers. His young adult Alex Rider series has sold more than 19 million copies worldwide. He created Midsummer Murders and the BAFTA-winning Falls War. He's worked on Poirot and the wildly acclaimed miniseries Collison and Injustice. And his award-winning novel Magpie Murders, which we will be talking about today, has been adapted into a 6-part miniseries on PBS, and it's just fabulous. But we're here today to talk mainly, I think, about the phenomenal Hawthorne and Hitchcock series. Hitchcock series. Was a weird slip of the tongue there.
As I appear in my own work.
There is a sort of Hitchcockian vibe there, I think, definitely. And that, I say that's a huge compliment as a huge fan. Hawthorne and Horowitz series, of which A Twist of the Knife is the 4th installment.
That's correct, yes.
And it's Hawthorne and Horowitz because you actually appear in the series as a sort of fictionalized version of yourself, which is just such a clever twist. And I'm so annoyed that you thought of it, because I would love to have a go at that, although I'd hate to write myself in fiction. I've done a lot of talking, so can you just give us the premise for this book?
The premise is that a private detective called Hawthorne, who used to be with Scotland Yard but got fired and is now working privately, has the idea that he's not earning enough money and wants to have somebody write books about him, the idea being they'll split the profits 50-50. And where the thing turns meta is that the writer that he hires to write about him, to become Watson to his Sherlock Holmes, is me. And it really is me. So it's me writing Foyle's War, me married to Jill Green, living in London, writing novels of my own. And I end up as a very reluctant and generally rather unhappy and unsuccessful and not too intelligent sidekick, the Watson to his Holmes. And that is the premise of the books. And in this 4th one, things take a further twist when a play of mine is very, very badly reviewed by a Sunday Times critic, something that has never happened to you, I'm sure, Lucy. But she writes a vile piece, and the next day is found dead with a knife that belongs to me, with my fingerprints on it, and I become the main suspect too. So I'm both the sidekick and the #1 suspect in this 4th book.
Oh, it's just wonderful. I love that theatre setting. I think you must have just had so much fun with that. Did you? It reminded me, to be honest, it reminded me of Hitchcock stage fright, you know, there was an element of that. Was that just a really fun canvas to play with?
Well, I am a huge fan of Hitchcock too. So, I mean, you know, he's informed my work for years and years, you know, in terms of tension and humor mixed with violence and just the way his structuring is so fantastic. I adore his films. And you're right, theatre is a wonderful location for murder and for sort of murder mystery, particularly of the sort of the golden age type of crime, because of course theatre is ageless in a way. You go backstage any theatre in London and you are basically walking into a Victorian building with all the trappings, as happened in this book. In terms of this book, it is also incidentally based on truth. I did write a play called Mind Game. It was performed at the Vaudeville Theatre. When I went back to do the research, I was delighted to see a poster of the play backstage, just in the corridor, which made me smile. And it's also true, unfortunately, the play very much divided the critics 50-50. Half of them hated it and half of them loathed it. So I had a very bad time with the response to the play, but that's sort of what it's all about. And it was wonderful revisiting that experience and sort of describing sort of how it feels, really. I mean, it's not an anti-critic book, and I have no death wish for critics, but I have to say that when you do write a play and they hit you with what they have to say, it is sort of quite a devastating experience.
Gosh, absolutely.
I've never murdered anybody though, not yet.
No, but well, that was going to be one of my questions. I have to say, be honest, was it quite cathartic to kill off a critic? Did you quite enjoy it?
No, you know, honestly, Lucy, I mean, I wish I could say I did, because when you get at the bad end of a review, you think the worst of the person writing it, but actually they're the same as us. They're writers. They're earning a living, and they're saying what they believe and think, and they are off. You know, before I wrote this book, I had lunch with a very, very distinguished theatre critic called Michael Billington, who is, you know, he's a Guardian critic, the father of all critics, and I wanted to try and get from him, what is it that makes critics so horrible? But actually, what I got from him was what makes critics so humane. He really sort of defended his corner of his work and such. And I realized that the one thing I couldn't do in this book was to take revenge and to sort of write unpleasantly. And I think that the way I've done that is by creating a character, Harriet Throsby, the Sunday Times critic, who is just one of a kind. You know, she deserves to be murdered because she is so horrible, but she does not represent critics I could name, but I'm very careful not to.
Good to know. But I mean, she is vicious. She's horrible. So we really sort of, you know, we're sort of delighted that is that too dark to say that? Is that showing my kind of true colours? But you know, you could sort of really see that you would want to murder this woman. And of course, in a murder mystery, you need to have your sort of pool of suspects. There are a lot of people that would like to do her in, you realise. Well,
there's the entire cast for a start, the producer, me, her husband, her daughter. I mean, she does manage to create an awful lot of enemies. But you raise an interesting question, which is, do you get pleasure in killing off your victim in your book? Do you share the murderer's delight in putting the knife in, literally or metaphysically? I mean, it's an interesting question.
Oh gosh, I think there is a sort of a weird, I don't want to say pleasure, because that's going to make me sound really, you know, tapped, but there's a satisfaction in it, I suppose, of kind of a righting of wrongs in a way, I think, which is sort of built into the sort of murder mystery structure. Don't you feel that?
Well, it's funny, it is a really interesting question, because I was talking recently about the murderers, the killers, and I put forward the theory, which I was put it to you, but actually, especially in an Agatha Christie novel, there is always a modicum of sympathy for the killer.
Yes,
somebody who commits murder, particularly in the golden age where you would be hanged if you were discovered, has got to have a huge reason to do it. And often, I mean, you think about the book, The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side, without giving too much away. The killer in that book is 100% sympathetic, and Agatha Christie does sympathize with that person. And I think that when I wrote The Twist of a Knife, when you get to the end chapter and the killer is revealed, I found myself writing with enormous sympathy for that person, because I completely understood why they had done what they had done. And it was sort of sad.
I really felt that too. The stakes were so high, and gosh, I'm really trying not to spoil anything here. You have to be so careful. But, you know, I almost found myself wishing that there was some sort of loophole, you know, that this person
But also another
could
interesting thing about
somehow...
murder mystery stories, which is that when you get to the final chapter of a murder mystery and the killer is revealed, you sort of lose interest in that person. You know, you never think what happens to them next. You know, they go to prison maybe for life, or they get hanged if it's in the 1950s, or they get off by some technicality. The story ends with their arrest, and they are no longer, they're only interesting while they are an unknown killer. The moment their identity is known, they lose all their interest. And I find that very interesting too about murder. So one day I will write a murder mystery where the solution happens around about chapter 15, but there are still 10 or 15 more chapters to go.
And you have to experience the aftermath. That's something I think P.D. James definitely explored. I'm sort of rereading her Adam Dalgleish series.
Oh, yes.
And, you know, you do, because it's a series in that way, you sort of, and because he has kind of relationships with characters that are involved from a previous book, you sort of see the impact of the crime. I don't want to kind of give too much away again, but certainly in the first book, you see how that crime impacts the family ongoing, you know, into their future. And yeah, so it's a really interesting point. So what's it like putting yourself into these books? Was it uncomfortable? Because they say that no one would recognize a portrait of themselves. No one would actually recognize themselves in fiction because it would be too unflattering. And so they wouldn't sort of see themselves clearly. Did you have to be really kind of honest with yourself? Was it sort of cathartic? Was it like a kind of therapy? Did you have to put your faults in?
It's a big question. I'll try and give it a fast answer.
Sorry.
The first thing is to anybody listening, I am not the main character in this book, and the book is not about me. I am simply the sidekick. I am the narrator. I am Watson to Hawthorne's Holmes, and the books are about Hawthorne, not about me. And the reason I did it was simply to try and invert murder mysteries, just as you yourself have found an amazing new formula or format for writing murder mystery, the multi-perspective murder mystery, which I love. I wanted to do something that hadn't been done in the whodunit form. And by becoming the sidekick, it occurred to me that I had got off the hill. The writer is normally on the hill. The author knows who the killer is. He knows, or she knows, what the weapon is, what the motive is, what the clues are, what the red herrings are. The writer knows everything. The sidekick knows nothing. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to swap places? So I am now 5 steps behind my detective. I know nothing. If a detective doesn't solve the crime, I don't even have a murder. I don't even have a book to write about. So it was just a fun way of doing murder mystery in a completely new sort of format. My publishers were very nervous. They said, look, Anthony, you're going to be using this for point scoring. Are you going to be telling people how great you are, how successful you are, how whatever you are? And I said, no, I am just a sidekick. It's a perspective that changes. And being in the book, obviously my wife gets a bit nervous because she turns up too. Jill Green, who produced all my TV shows, Foyle's War, and the rest of them. And my kids keep saying, Dad, we do not want to be anywhere near his books.
Yeah, so embarrassing. Yeah.
But, yeah, exactly. And but you know, because the books aren't about me, I think it is working. It is, you know, I am also, because I am so hopeless in these books, I mean, in 2 of them, I end up in hospital at the end of it. So, you know, through one mistake after another. Plus, I keep saying the wrong thing in interviews and ruining it for everybody. So I think the sort of, you know, this idea of being, instead of being clever, being completely hapless is working rather well.
Oh, it's brilliant.
Enjoying the relationship with Hawthorne as well.
Oh, it's brilliantly done.
Difficult character, tricky man.
Totally. And we will come on to him now. You know, I think he'd be quite annoyed to be sort of left second, but that's how that whole relationship works. Where does the character of Hawthorne come from? Because he's fascinating. He's brilliant. He's kind of enigmatic. He's not all that nice, you know, but he's sort of, you see sort of little glimmers of something else, like he's in a book club. So obviously he can't be, you know, a totally heinous human being.
He has no friends. He only has his book club. This rather weird book club in the flats, in the apartment block where he lives, where he goes downstairs to meet with these very, very strange people. And they seem to be his sort of entire social life. Yeah. He is a difficult character. And of course, one of the fun aspects of the books is that with every book that I write, starting, you know, from the very first one, Word is Murder, through to this one, A Twist of a Knife, we're learning a little bit more about him each time. And you'll know this, that when you write a character, and I've written 14 books about Alex Rider now, the more you write about them, the more you get to know about them. With Hawthorne, it's slightly different, and I have to keep asking him, what is the relationship you have with your wife? Well, what happened to you in the town of Reeth in Yorkshire? Why won't you tell me anything about yourself? I've got to write about you. So it's a sort of a fight, but it's still what a writer does, which is to investigate and to interrogate a character. And I'm thinking of writing 12 of these books. That's sort of how many.
Brilliant.
And it's only in book 12 we will finally find out what happened to Hawthorne when he was clearly very young, but turned him into this very difficult and damaged, slightly depressive man. But the other thing I want to say about this is that with every book I write, I like him more. And I think it is.
Me too.
You probably agree with this. I think it is impossible to enjoy a book if you do not like the central character. Has anybody ever written a book with a completely unlikable detective or central character in which the audience, the readers, want to take part? I always say that with Sherlock Holmes, the genius of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was that he created a very, very difficult, obsessive and aloof, drug-taking, not particularly interesting or likable man, but then gave him Watson, who loves him. And Watson's love for Holmes sells the book, sells the character and the stories to us, and makes Holmes human. And that's what I think is happening with Hawthorne, that because with every book I write, I like him more. And I hope that that's translating and transmitting itself to the audience, because, I think he's not a bad man. He is a good man. He's a troubled one, but he's kind, really, at heart.
Absolutely. And he's fascinating. I just want to know all his secrets. Do you know all of his secrets?
I know 80% of what happened in Reeth all those years ago.
Right.
And as I write the books, I'm sort of uncovering more. So in this book, for example, we discover that he belongs to a very peculiar, sort of almost a secret society with a character called Morton. I'm not incidentally giving anything away here to anybody listening here. I mean, this is just stuff that you will find in the book. But I don't yet know quite who Morton is. I don't quite know what the society is. I've got a sort of a half an idea, but like the character in the book, I have to investigate further to find out, what do they do? Who are they? Well, how much are they paying him? What is his involvement? And that's part of the fun of writing, I think. Writing is actually an act of discovery as much as of creation.
I was going to say that because I do events with authors who sound so organized, and it sounds so much easier to just plan everything in advance. And I sort of every time I wish that I did that myself. But don't you?
I thought your books are so highly your books are very, very carefully structured. You're telling me you don't sit down and work it all out before you start writing?
No, I can't. Oh. I try every time, and then I just feel incredibly bored, and I can't, and it feels dead. It doesn't.
It's funny you should say that, because I do think that if you overstructure, if you write everything down too carefully, you do end up writing almost in a formulaic way. And I think a writer has to surprise themselves if they're going to surprise their readers. And you are, of course, the master or the mistress of surprises all the time. And I guess, therefore, you must occasionally just come upon something and say, hey, that's what I'm going to do, and go where it takes you.
Well, I've had it with the book I'm writing at the moment. I think if you're surprised as the author, then there's a good chance, hopefully, that your reader will be. I think that's
I so agree. I've always said writing is telepathy. When a reader reads a book, they're inside the head of the writer. So if the writer is surprised, if the writer is excited, if the writer is happy, those emotions will feed their way through the words to the reader. If you sit down and you write and you're writing in a formulaic, or you're bored, or you just want to get the damn thing over with and go out and have some fun, I think the reader will pick up on that too.
Absolutely. That's why if I ever get to that sort of where it feels a little bit turgid, that's when I have to kind of leave my computer and go for a walk or watch a film. That's what I do. I take my dog out and
you go on the South Downs and I go around the River Thames at Richmond. But that is exactly how I am too. Yeah.
Interesting. So this Watson-Holmes relationship, do you think it will approach more of a friendship then? So you say you like him kind of more and more with each book. Do you think we will see sort of more affection between you two?
I'm not sure that Hawthorne will ever be particularly affectionate to me. Although I think the more I come to understand him, the more I understand that Hawthorne isn't really capable of affection. I mean, there's one moment in this new book where, again, I'm not giving away too much, where I end up spending the night in Hawthorne's flat and even sleep in the bed that belongs to his son. There's a description I rather like in the book where I wake up in the morning and my feet are cold because they're sticking out at the end of the duvet because the son is so much smaller than me and I'm in a child's bed. And just being in that room and realizing that Hawthorne is a human being and a father and a divorced man, though he's still sort of relating to his wife in some way, and that the flat is so much, his apartment is so much reflective of a damaged life. Well, I have a sort of a sympathy and a fondness for him, and I can't bring myself to search the place because it would be betraying his trust. So I don't think you'll find affection between us, but what I hope you will find as the books go across is affection from me and maybe from Hawthorne, a touch more kindness. I don't know. I hope so anyway.
Interesting. No, I think that's such a great moment for the reader as well, sort of seeing inside his flat, going into his son's bedroom. It's almost like we've sort of got this advent calendar of Hawthorne, and we're sort of...
It's also interesting, but Hawthorne has lied to me because he's told me in one of the earlier books that his son never reads any of my books. But when I go into the bedroom, there they all are on the shelf, which I thought was interesting. And it's funny how I'm having this conversation with you as if we're talking about somebody who's real and is not actually sort of invented by me. But that is sort of how I feel about him when I'm writing the books, that he's out of my... No, I hate it when authors say their characters are out of their control. He does what I tell him to, sort of, in writing. But in the world of the books, he's very much...
It has to feel like that to you, because and that is how he feels for the reader. You know, I absolutely believe in Hawthorne. I feel like I would recognize him if he walked into a room. And so you transmit that onto the page. I think it's so important. Yeah, it's brilliant.
It's a hard thing to get right. So especially if you've got a detective who's going to be in 12 books, one after another, you've got to get it right. And you think about all the great detective novels ever written. Whether you were talking about Dalgleish a moment ago and P.D. James, but and I talk about Doyle or I talk about Christie. The detectives is what marks them out. You think about Lord Peter Wimsey with Dorothy L. Sayers, and we don't really remember or know what Dorothy L. Sayers was like, but most people, certainly at my age, would recognise Wimsey if he walked into the room.
Absolutely, and his carpets. Right. So you touched briefly on the fact that you suddenly realise he has your books, his son has your books in his room, which brings me on to the wonderful sort of humour in the books. Do you think sort of humour or an element of sort of playfulness, and there is so much humour, there's so much wonderful banter, and you're so good at laughing at yourself and getting us to laugh at you, to be honest. Do you think that kind of humour and playfulness is important for this kind of murder mystery format, as opposed to a sort of psychological thriller?
It's another very good question, because of course so many crime writers are writing quite dark, quite sort of hard-edged, even shocking books, and I love them. I mean, I read many of them, and I suppose for me, I don't want the books to turn into comedies. I don't want them to be read as sort of Jeeves and Wooster style jokey books. But I think with the banter and the warmth and the wit, which is sort of seeping in willy-nilly, it just happens to be there, is really helping the books. Because apart from anything else, Hawthorne is not a terribly nice man, and he is damaged clearly in some ways. And I think the books would become a little bit grim in a funny way if one didn't treat him with a half a smile. And when I write jokes, and there are lots of jokes in The Twist of a Knife, I think that it does help. I find not a lot, but there are some crime novels I read that are so focused on the crime and on the mechanics of the crime and on the cleverness of the crime, but they forget the humanity. They forget the smile that's in there too. So, and especially now, crime fiction has been such a sort of it's been so helpful to people in the time of COVID, in the time of this terrible war that is happening in Europe now, and in the sense of the inflation and the worry about the world economy. There is a sense of people wanting now. During COVID, as I'm sure you know, books spiked massively, but the books that sold were crime fiction. And there is a sense where people are wanting, I think, to get into bed, to pull out the covers, to close the curtains, to have the fire on, a cup of coffee or hot chocolate, and to just lose themselves in a book. And if it's got a smile in there too, I really think that is important at this time where we find ourselves.
Yeah, fantastic answer. I think it's a sort of this sort of book, a murder mystery. It's a kind of game, isn't it, between the author and the reader? You know, it's a sort of there's a contract there. That doesn't sound very fun, but you know what I mean. It's sort of there is a sort of almost, I don't know, I say it like a camp quality to it. It's sort of it's fun. Whereas I think you know, straight psychological thriller can be brilliant in its own way, but doesn't have that sort of element of play.
That's it. I mean, I was talking earlier today about a book I read very recently. I don't know if you've read it yet. Liz Nugent's next book is
I've just got it.
Strange Sally Diamond.
Yes,
and
it looks brilliant.
It is one of the darkest, bleakest, most unfunny books you'll find. It is a work of genius. So I'm not destroying people who don't put humor in their book.
Oh, absolutely
that to me is a book that everybody will be talking about next year. It is absolutely wonderful, but very, very dark book.
Oh God,
I'm here. Liz, I just wonder how such a nice person.
I know, she's lovely.
Such terrible thoughts in her head.
She's lovely. But I think that's the thing about crime writers. I think we sort of get our issues out on the page. So every crime writer I've ever met has been genuinely lovely. And it's one
of the great joys of being a crime writer. But there is you know, this camaraderie and friendship and fraternity, sorority of writers, and I have found that being part of the writing family. And it's funny, we're all dealing in violence and murder and psychological damage and horror, and yet I haven't yet met anybody who strikes me as particularly unpleasant. I noticed a message coming up there. Somebody asked me what the name of the book was. It's called Strange Sally Diamond. It's the next book by Liz Nugent, but it won't be out until I think spring of next year.
And it looks brilliant. I haven't read it yet, but I've read her other books, and she is just brilliant. Oh, I am there for the darkness. You know, I love sort of.
For both.
I'm sort of an omnivorous in my crime appetite, I would say. You know, I'll read into everything.
Good. Yes.
Yeah. So, but talking about this sort of puzzle, this sort of game, do you have a feeling of when you want the reader to guess? Is it as you give your sort of great reveal? Is it just before? Is it, because there are sort of all sorts of ideas about when that should actually happen, and I've heard it said that the reader should guess just before.
It's such a great question, Lucy. It is such it's right to the core of what I think both of us do. I'm going to ask you to answer the question, but I'll go first since you asked me. As far as when I put one of my books out and I meet somebody who's read it, the first question I say is not did you enjoy it, did you guess it? And if they say yes, I did guess it, there is a part of me that is annoyed, but at the same time, I'm also quite happy because occasionally I will guess the ending of a book. I haven't done one of yours yet, but occasionally I will guess the ending. No, I've guessed little bits with you. Occasionally I'll get part of it right, but not the whole picture. And I have a feeling that actually what you do in your writing is you toss out a few giveaways. So
I think you want the reader to guess a few.
Yeah, I think you do. You don't want us to guess the whole thing, but you want us to get little details of it, right? Secret passages in flats, for example, sort of thing.
Yeah.
No, I want all the clues. When somebody reads my novels, I want them to have all the clues in plain sight. And so I don't want them to get to the end of the day, but that's not fair. Fair play is absolutely vital. I don't want them to guess, to be honest with you. I'd much rather they don't. In fact, my American publisher is very, very good at guessing the answer. And if he does, I say, well, how did you guess?
Yeah.
And I take out the bit that gave him the answer. So I always get a second bite to make sure that no one else.
That's so good to have a reader like that. That's really important. Yeah.
So I don't want them to guess, but I do want them to get to the last chapter, like I do with an Agatha Christie sometimes, and say, "Oh, of course I should have seen that. Of course that makes sense. That's what you really." Isn't that the same for you? That you want them just to have that?
Absolutely. I think you want them to feel surprised, but not tricked. But you also you want that surprise. You know, within that, you want it to be a sort of but of course moment, of course, you know. I actually watched I mean, it's rather different to what we're doing, but it's still, I would say, a whodunit in a way. It's the first kind of Generation Z whodunit, I suppose you could say. It's called Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. And it's really, I mean, it's really silly and it's really gory. It's sort of a slasher meets whodunit. But the reveal, I thought, was really cleverly done.
I've written it down. I've written it down.
Bodies, Bodies, Bodies.
Great title, by the way. I love that title.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? It's a game. Yeah. It's a game that they play. It's very playful. It's very funny, dark humor, but it's very well done.
And it's by a young writer, very young writer.
So it's a film. I
Oh, it's
think
a film you're talking about, not a book.
it's a film. No, it's a film.
I haven't even heard of it. How
No,
extraordinary.
I took myself. Well, it didn't make a big splash over here, but I took myself to the cinema to watch it, and I think I was the only person in the cinema, but I was so pleased that I did, because it was great fun. Speaking of the screen, I feel we should talk a little bit about Magpie Murders, which has, I think, just come out on PBS.
PBS in America, and it was on BritBox in England, and it's going to be relaunched again next year. And all the news is good. It's done extremely well, and that's largely down to the wonderful Peter Catania, who directed it, and the equally wonderful Leslie Manville, who stars in it.
I love her.
Currently playing Princess Margaret in The Crown.
Margaret, yeah.
She's brilliant in that too. And it was a joy to make it. And my wife, Jill Green, was the producer. And it was a very, very difficult adaptation, a 650-page book with multiple characters, plot lines, and all the rest of it. 2 completely different time frames, 1955, a fictional world, and the modern world of Susan Ryland, an editor, and how the 2 interact. It was very, very difficult to do, but it's all worked out brilliantly. And I'm very much hoping that come sort of January, February, I'll be writing Moonflower Murders, the sequel. In fact, I'm seeing Leslie next week to have exactly that conversation with her. So I'm feeling very, very excited about it and happy. And
wonderful.
And it was a wonderful experience. It's one of, when you has anyone bought your rights yet? Are you on to TV?
Yes. Yeah, not on.
I mean, your books are made for
TV
it, so
but it's
I'm not surprised. But when it all goes well, TV is so much a toss of the coin. When it all goes well, the casting, the direction, the production, the script and everything just works together. It is such a wonderful, wonderful. Somebody just said, put up a thing saying their wife loves Tim McMullen. Tim McMullen was in Foyle's War. He did 2 seasons in Foyle's War, which is how I met him. And he is, I think, a very, very underrated actor. He plays Atticus Punt. And I'm so hopeful that when we do the 2 shows together, he's also coming in next week, and we're going to talk to him as well about the future. He is a wonderfully talented and a lovely man too. So I couldn't have had a happier time.
It's so brilliantly done.
COVID, by the way, we had to shoot in COVID.
Did you?
Yeah, very, very.
What a feat!
£1 million of our budget, £1 million went on COVID protection. It's so sad. Instead of on, antique cars and costumes and effects and more time, it had to go on, just keeping the actors and the background artists and the villagers safe. But there you go. But it was a very happy experience. I'm so happy to see lots of comments flashing up.
Yeah, there's a lot of great comments flashing up.
He's a lovely man as well. Utterly wonderful. I should call him after this call and say I was on a call and to Lucy and lots of people said how good you were. He'll be happy.
No, it is absolutely beautifully done. And it's also gorgeous to look at. I know it's really superficial to say that, but Leslie Manville's costume, her wardrobe, her bookshelves, it's sort of, such a treat.
Leslie came in very, very early on this production, and it took us, I think, something like a year to raise the finance to make it. And she was indefatigable in supporting, going to meetings, talking about the show. It's lovely when you meet an actor as successful and as famous as she is, and there's nothing bad to say about her. I don't have to pretend. I mean, she's just totally what you see on the screen, this wonderful person. And I couldn't have asked for a better Susan Ryland. Incidentally, I loved writing for the first time in a woman's voice in the book and on the TV show, and particularly having a woman of a certain age who, so she's not in the first flush of youth, but she is still completely fulfilled. There were no sort of, arthritis, no sort of slowing down, no sort of my career's over. She was completely energized and such. And she's just wonderful to write for.
Yeah. She's just gorgeous. She's sort of, she's very kind of sexy in a way as a character as well. She's sort of
absolutely. That's what I'm saying. She is a total 100%. Such perfect.
That scene with who we think is
perfect in that role. So agree with you, Nancy.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's on the bottom of my screen.
And I think also you've managed to retain in the TV adaptation this wonderful sort of tactile kind of bookish quality to it all, because that's what I loved about reading the books, is this sort of, it's a book within a book, it's a murder mystery within a murder mystery. There's this sort of wonderful texture to it. And you feel that, you've got the sort of pages, you've got the books on her bookshelf, you've got the sort of you've got the book literally being written at the beginning, and as you know, as a kind of author, ex-publisher, you know, the whole lot. I felt like it was made for me, but I think it's made for everyone who loves books. It's just glorious.
Well, I think with both The Twist of a Knife and with those Malpai Murders, one of the pleasures I'm having is the ability to not just write the murder mysteries, but to write a little bit about murder mysteries. You know, there's so many, I find there are so many interesting questions to ask. I mean, just on a basic level, why is it that a murder in the street or a murder in newspapers makes us feel depressed and or even disgusted, whereas a murder in a book, no matter how violent and horrible, is entertainment? What happens?
Sort of rubbing our hands in glee.
Transition across. And you know, why do people read these books, and why do so many books take place in villages, and what's the difference between what's called sort of, you know, golden age crime and modern crime? And such, you know, I find all that discussion absolutely wonderful to sort of, you know, it inspires me to write more, but it allows me at the same time still to just play the games with, you know, the tricks and the red herrings and the clues and all the rest of it.
And do it double, you know. I mean, how did you keep those two plots?
Well, Malpai Murders, of course, on TV had this joy of having actors who were 1955 characters being played also by their modern counterparts.
Yes, you've got these
swapping
sort of
between the two. I mean, that was just.
I think that's so clever when you suddenly realise it's the sister, and you see, you know, and she's just got different hair and different. Brilliant, like love that.
It was one of the rare television outings where everything went right.
Oh,
I wish you were the same, Lucy. I really hope it
joy.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Well, if you haven't watched it, please, it's brilliant. I'm going to rewatch it. It was, I mean, it was a really sort of, I didn't want to say cozy, because cozy sounds like, you know, there's a lot sort of said about cozy crime, but it is a sort of, for this time of year, it's a kind of just cozy, glorious TV watching experience.
I'm with you, but I don't like the phrase cozy crime, because it seems to me to be an oxymoron. I mean, it's crime is never really cozy, but there are cozy ways of describing it, I suppose. And I like you, I do like. You see, I like your books as well, because they're not. As I get older, I find myself shying away from sort of the ultra violent knife into the chest and the blood splatter and the pain and children being killed and women being chased. I'm finding myself. I mean, I'm not destroying it. Again, there are books where that is which I love, but I do like now to have books that are slightly more, I don't know, slightly less threatening, slightly less ugly. But that's probably my age.
No, I agree. I think it is the world we live in as well, to be honest. I think you can't sort of stress that point too much. It feels like quite a sort of dark and scary place out there where we don't have answers to a lot of things. We don't know how a lot of things are going to end. So I think having, you know, that wonderful sort of murder mystery, things wrapped up for you with a nice bow.
Again, I've said it often, the great joy of a murder mystery is that there is no other genre in literature where you arrive at the ultimate and complete truth. Every I dotted, every T crossed, the community healed, the crime solved.
Yeah.
The detective disappears because he or she is not wanted anymore, and everything is all right again. No wonder it's popular in a world which is ever more inexplicable and threatening.
Well, I think I'm being really greedy here, and I think it's probably time to move on to, I could honestly ask hours and hours of questions, but we've got some really great questions that have been sent in from the audience in advance. And I think there are also questions in the Q&A box. So I will try to get through a few of these because there are some bangers. So let's start. What is your first step in the writing process, specifically with the Hawthorne and Horowitz stories? And that's from Jenny.
It's always the murder. I mean, for me, the murder is the bullseye at the center of a dance board. Two people, A and B. A kills B for a reason which is C. That's where I start. And the reason has to be something really interesting, not just because, I don't know, A wants B's money, or B is sleeping with A's wife, or A hates B, or A is scared of B. Something that's interesting and that hasn't been done. And then I start thinking about who are they? What is their profession? And that gives me the next layer, which I've got to start doing. If A is a cook, I've got to create a restaurant. I've got to learn about cooking techniques and all that sort of world, etc. And it just sort of expands from there. But I always begin with the murder and the motive. And they've got to be, the motive has got to be really interesting.
And so you always know, so A, your killer, do you know the identity of A, your killer,
You must
from
do
the beginning.
too. See, I won't believe
No,
you.
I don't. In every book I've written, I thought I did, and then I've changed my mind about a third of the way in.
No, I
Yeah.
always know. That's where I always begin. There's no, to me, there has to be sort of almost an inevitability about it that when the killer is revealed on page 380, it couldn't have been anybody else.
Couldn't have been anyone else. Yeah, that's fascinating. I should try that.
No, you're doing very well without having to do it my way. We all do things our own way. That's the joy of it.
But that's interesting because it sounds like in some ways we have a very similar sort of approach in that, you don't know everything when you start out, and there has to be some mystique and you want to discover things on the journey. But we start from a really different place. I start really with location and character, but don't really know, how.
Well, I mean,
your
books, what makes your books so great are the characters. They're all so well drawn, and the locations, particularly in the last one in Paris, are so vividly imagined. Also, you were living in Paris, so you wasn't imagining you could look out your window. But I love that. So I don't disagree with you. They have to be the number one thing. But for me, in order to interest me in writing those characters and wanting to, they come out of the murder. The murder starts, and and if it is the cook who has murdered the head waiter, I'm in the restaurant now, and I'm getting to what is simmering tension between those two people. What did the waiter do to the cooked food, or whatever, or what did he say? That got such a strong response.
How do we get to that?
It starts with a death.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I think I'm going to try that for my next book. It's an exercise.
I'll try your technique, and you can try mine. We both have terrible plots. We can blame each other.
So, why did you decide to make yourself a humorous character who unwittingly ends up in near-death situations? And that's from Leah. Great question.
The answer to that's very simple, Leah. I'm only good at one thing in life, and that's writing. I am not good at almost anything else you care to mention on this planet, from sort of programming the computer to maths, to science, to geography, to finding my way to places, to social intercourse. I mean, at parties where I forget everybody's names. I'm only good at writing. So if I was going to be in the book as anything other than a writer, which I am, because I'm both the writer and the sidekick, it followed as day follows night, but I would be no good at it. And that's why I always end up either in hospital at the end of the books, or in trouble, or in jail, or just in disgrace. It's sort of, it is unfortunately how I am.
Brilliant. But you really, I mean, in this book in particular, you really up the ante. You're in some pretty high peril in this book. Did that feel quite uncomfortable? In the process, right? Did you feel sort of, because I felt worried for you, and you felt, you were very sort of suddenly very kind of removed from your usual life and your family, and there was a sort of horrible. Yeah.
There is a moment of complete truth in the book where my publisher read the book and said, it's all very good, but I don't believe you wouldn't have told your wife that you're in jail and you are being accused of murder. And I said, you just don't understand our relationship. Of course I wouldn't have told her. And I had to tell the publisher that 5 years ago, I had a very, very bad motorbike accident in Greece. And I swore, I was driving at night, and I'd been to a party. I had only had one glass of wine, not more than that. But even so, I had one. And when I woke up in hospital with bones broken all over my body, the first thing I said as I got back to consciousness was, "Don't tell my wife." that was what worried me more than my own fatality. So I'm not quite sure why I mentioned that story, but I think it answers the question you asked.
That's brilliant. No, I think I'd be the same with my husband if I ended up in prison, because he's very sensible. He just be like, what's she done now? But of course. Is there any chance that the Detective Hawthorne books will be dramatized? And would you do the screenplay? That's from Patricia. Please.
Gosh, Patricia, I mean, so far, no bites. I don't know why not, but nobody.
Why?
There's a couple of nibbles, but no bites yet. It might. I mean, I don't know why. It just might be that people look at these books and wonder how they would adapt. And I mean, I can tell you now, I wouldn't play myself.
I was going to ask. That was going to be my next question. Yeah.
And the question was, would I adapt them? Possibly not. It might be too incestuous. The only thing I can say is that if we ever do them for television, just as the books are about books, I would make it a TV show about a TV show. So it would all be about the producers, the directors. You'd see behind the camera as well as the show itself. And I think
love
there is
it.
a TV show to be made there, but
Yeah.
but as I say, as yet, no one racing with their checkbooks to make it.
That, honestly, I am baffled by that. I think it's just right. I think it's, he's got such great characters. That's madness.
Well, it'll come. These things come in their own time, and it's sort of I've got Magpie and Moonflower to beginning on with. So, and I'm also doing a TV show for Jill set in the Mexican jungle, called 9 Bodies in a Mexican Morgue. So I'm writing that for her as well.
Fantastic.
So I've got plenty to beginning on with.
So when you have an idea for a new book, do you run it by Jill? Do you sort of get her take on it, or do you sort of keep it to yourself for a bit?
Because the trouble is if you tell somebody an idea for a book, and they might say, yeah, that sounds fun, or they might say it doesn't sound much fun. But at the end of the day, the only voice I'm interested in is mine. Do I think it's going to work? And the only reason to tell somebody an idea is to hear myself saying it. As I speak the idea and say, so it's about this guy who's a detective and he hires me to be and etc. As I tell that, I'm beginning to live the story.
Right.
But what the person then says is sort of, it sounds a bit arrogant, almost irrelevant.
No, I get that. But I have to say, I think when you're at that sort of early stage of thinking about a book, if I actually put it into words, it would always sound a bit mad. It would sound completely crackers. It sort of has to, I suppose, take shape on the page first before it has.
That's right. I mean, I don't show my books incidentally to anybody before they're finished ever. Really? And I always say to young writers, don't, rather than say, will you look at the first few chapters of the book I'm writing? I say no, because you've got to believe in the book start to finish. You've got to go with it. You've got to live with it for maybe a year and a half. The writing, the selling, the publicity, and etc. You don't want an alien voice spoiling what is in your head. Believe in yourself. Write your story. Follow it to the end. Then show it to people.
Then because it immediately, it's so important, that editing process and that sort of, but it immediately becomes compromised, doesn't it? It's sort of,
do you show your stuff to your husband or your partner? I mean,
not before I've written the first draft, but then he's my first reader, and he's
Jill, my
he's
wife,
next lawyer. He's horrible.
Jill reads well, that's very helpful. Jill reads the first drafts of my books too. I mean, and her word is so valuable to me. Yeah.
And do you immediately know when you have an idea, because obviously you've written so much, you've written so many different sort of formats. Do you immediately know this is a book idea, this is a TV idea, this is a play?
Yes. An idea comes in the genre it's intended for. This is a short story. It's only got that far to run. This is a novel. This is a children's book. This is a film, television, a play. I think, especially a play, for example, where, a play is 3, 4, 5 people on a stage, no special effects, no cuts, no flashbacks, not necessarily anyway. So it has to be a play. And I also like to think of the work fitting the form you're going to give it. So if, for example, it's a play, I like the idea that it actually uses what the theatre might offer. That's what Mind Game tried to do with it, because it played tricks with the stage and all sorts of things. And a film, on the other hand, you start thinking of, well, wow, I can send a drone flying over St. Paul's Cathedral and pull back to reveal this, that, and the other. So, you start to think about the genre and the way it can help your story. So
and so you sort of see it in that cinematic.
There's always a fit. Whenever I write, there's a fit between what I'm going to write and how it's going to appear.
So Mind Game isn't your last foray into theatre, hopefully.
No. Funnily enough, I'm talking to Ragnar Jonassen, who you know. And the two of us are talking about doing a murder mystery play for the theatre. He came up with a very, very interesting idea, which I have sort of shaken up a little bit and sent back to him. He's shaken it again and sent it back to me. And between us, we've come up with something which I think is quite interesting and fun. It's an interesting fact that very, very few whodunits, murder mysteries, have ever worked on the stage. In fact, really, I can only think of one. The obvious one, the Mousetrap.
Yeah, Mousetrap.
Witness for the prosecution has done very well in London, but largely they just don't work. And I'm interested in why not and whether they can be made to work.
Oh, fantastic. That's going to be exciting. Great collaboration there, you two as well.
I'm just worried because Ragnar and I are very different sorts of writers. He's very fast, very impatient, very sort of, let's just get this done. I'm very slow, very methodical, very old. Let's think about this again. And I think it's a possibility that one of us might end up murdering the other, but I'm not sure which way around it will be.
Well, there's a great story in it then, anyway.
And I noticed Tamir is listening to this conversation. Just want to say how nice to see you or to hear from you, Tamir, who I last saw, I think, in Battersea Park.
Oh, fantastic. A capital crime?
Capital crime, indeed.
Brilliant.
You were there too.
Yeah, it was great fun. Beautiful weather, says wistfully.
on the day we were there, anyway, it was. I think the next day it was a squall.
So next question, because there are so many brilliant questions. In Magpie, it's mentioned that the fictional mystery writer Alan Conway was more of an Agatha Christie style writer than a Sherlock Holmes one. How would you compare the two?
Wow, that's a tricky question to lob.
And that's from Heather.
I should say. Okay. Sherlock Holmes is the great grandfather of the modern crime novel, and Agatha Christie said it herself that she lent on him and used him. He created the sort of the 3-act structure of, the crime, the investigation, and the solution. He also created the sidekick to a large extent. He even created really the modern detective. Some say that it was Dupin, the creation of Edgar Allan Poe, but I think it is Sherlock Holmes. Your question is what was the question exactly?
So actually, there's a bit. I missed a bit of the bottom. How would you compare the two?
How would I compare the two?
RE, followers, and fandom.
I revere Doyle more,
Interesting.
because of his influence on me was so huge in terms of my writing and everything I've done, and that template, that friendship. Christie, of course, is a genius of structure and plot and idea. But the world of Holmes, I think simply because it is that 19th century vision of London, the fog growlers, the cobblestones, the violin, Moriarty, there is some sort of magic on almost every page of every story Doyle ever wrote. And so, I don't like to say I prefer one to the other. I mean, Christie has been, the 9 Bodies in a Mexican Morgue is a straightforward has been quite clearly inspired by And Then There Were None.
And Then There Were None,
So she still remains with the Mousetrap, with And Then There Were None, and with Roger Ackroyd, and with Orient Express. She did things that leave me anyway, floundering to find ideas that are as good, that are new and original. I'm not sure she left anything for us to do.
Well, there's a very clever moment in Magpie Murders, isn't there? The TV adaptation, I can't remember if this is in the book, when Alan Conway, he's trying to think of the solution and he quickly checks one of his
He does it in the book and on the TV. He does it both. He keeps Agatha Christie by his desk.
I recognise that moment as a writer. I sort of, not that I've lifted anything wholesale from Agatha Christie or anyone else, but, there is that sort of, how would Agatha do this?
I must tell you that I try not to read murder mystery too much because I'm too worried about coming across ideas that are brilliant and which I would wish to have used. I read a wonderful thriller by Ira Levin, A Kiss Before Dying, which has in it the best clue I have ever seen in a murder mystery novel. And to this day, I kick myself when I read the book because now I can't do it myself.
Now you can't do it and pretend that. Great. This is a good one. Can you describe the feelings you have when you go to send the first draft of your written work to an editor or a publisher? Are you nervous, confident? Also, what do you normally do once you hit the send button? I feel like you start writing again. I feel like you start writing something else.
I always take a day off. When I finish a book, I take one day off and do no writing at all. I feel a sense of relief. I mean, I'm writing a novel at the moment. It's sitting on the table in front of me. Here it is. And I just can't wait to get to the last page and to be able to not send the send button, but at least to sort of do the save button and then start reading it. That's Alex Wright.
That's Alex Wright. Great.
But I get nervous. I always get nervous when I send the books off because it's you get that sense of, oh my God, it's awful, it's terrible, she's gonna hate it, it's gonna, it's all wrong. Your confidence ebbs, and when I think up the book and I'm writing it, it's of course a Nobel Prize winning masterpiece. Once I finish it, that's when the fear and the worry sort of sneaks in.
No, I recognize that feeling. I was that loser that sort of would leave an exam and kind of go, wake up in the middle of the night running through all of the questions that I suddenly realized I got wrong. And I do that. And like, why do I do this? Why do I do this job? Why? Yeah. Can't do anything else.
Fear of failure, fear of being found out, that we all writers have, when suddenly people wake up and realize they were no good at all, ever.
I mean, it's
And that's what happens when I
the...
finish the book and send it in. I get that feeling of failure and fear.
This is the one. This is the one that's going to destroy my, yeah. But that's the human condition, isn't it? I suppose, the imposter syndrome, I think.
Exactly.
Maybe Elon Musk doesn't have it, but everyone else does. You know?
And after his adventures in Twitter, he might start gendering it.
This is a great one. Would you ever consider writing a full Pund novel? I wondered about this. I always wish I could read the whole Pund book. And is it fun or slightly... Oh, no, sorry. That's a kind of separate question. So we'll just stick with that one. And that's from Jessica.
Jessica, a whole Atticus Pund novel without Susan Rowland would, I think, defeat the point of it. Also, I've given away the endings of at least 3 of the ones that Alan Conway wrote, which doesn't leave me many to actually write. Yeah. So I don't know is a simple answer. I don't think so. But that said, I've learned in my career, never say never, never say no. Who knows? It's a possibility. I mean, I've still got 8 more Hawthorne books to write. I've got the new Alex Rider next year. I've got 1 more Susan Rowland book to write, definitely. After that,
brilliant!
Knows?
I was going to ask that.
There's a 3rd one after Moonflower Murders.
Fantastic.
But
great. Is that written, or have you? Or you
no,
writing
because I have an idea. I have an idea. I thought.
Brilliant. Had you always planned to write more than one, or
no, quite the opposite. I was only ever going to write one, which was going to be Magpie Murders. And then when Jill, my wife, said she wanted to make a TV show, she said, you do realize that it'd be much easier to raise the finance if there are 2 books, because then the financiers know if they have a sequel, which is sort of, very bankable. So Moonflower Murders was born on the back of that, but I had to write it for Jill. It worked out very well in the end. I thought it wouldn't, but it actually worked out well. And then the 3rd one has come to mind. I don't know, because just I had a thought. I had an idea.
Yeah. Was there, writing the 2nd one, was there this sort of, when you realised you were going to have to write it, was there this sort of, how am I going to pull this off again? Because it is such a kind of feat, having this sort of, this Russian doll.
It's really to say, but I didn't have to sit back and say what a masterpiece Magpie Murders is. I can't possibly do anything again. But you are right that having cracked it once, I was quite nervous about doing it a second time. And it was only coming up with a completely new idea, a separate idea. First book has a sort of an unfinished novel in it. The second one has a finished novel, so it's a novel within a novel, and that was very different. And coming up with just a completely different way of playing the same game. But in fact, the first book took me something like 15 years to write.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. The second
I'm not surprised, because
just thinking about it, not always writing it, but just thinking about it and toying with it. The second book took me 15 months, so it was a much easier read.
So you're away. Brilliant.
Right.
I think we've got time for a couple more questions. How important has your own love of puzzles been in influencing your writing, Matthew?
It's a lovely question, Matthew. Thank you for asking it. I've always loved puzzles. I do crosswords, like many crime writers. Colin Dexter famously was actually created crosswords, the writer of Morse. I love puzzles. I love anagrams, illusions. I do magic. I mean, I don't perform magic, but I'm very interested in the world of magic and sleight of hand. In fact, one of my novels, Moriarty, is based entirely on a card trick. A very simple card trick, but nonetheless, a card trick is sort of the structure of a novel. And I love illusions and curiosities, toys. I have a huge collection of toys. You can actually see sort of some of them on the shelf behind me as I sit here, up on the top shelf there. And I love anything that isn't what it seems to be. I love this room I'm in has a secret passage that leads to my wife's office next door. And that to me is just sort of
that's wonderful.
Of a writing, having magic in the room. So all these things feed my work, always have done.
Brilliant. Final question for me, because we've probably massively overrun. Because I want to know this as an author myself. I'm kind of just starting out in my career, really. And obviously, you've had this wonderful kind of you continue to have this wonderful, hugely varied career. What is it that keeps you coming back to the desk time and again?
I can answer it with one word: story. I love story. I love telling stories. I love the world of fiction and narrative and surprises and jokes and everything that goes into a book. You and I are so blessed and so lucky that we are doing what we love and we're paid for it and we are successful at it. and we can continue doing it. And that in itself, it's not about money, it's not about fame or celebrity, it's not about prestige or anything other than just the joy of telling a story.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I mean, I think my greatest fear is somehow not being able to write anymore. It's just the only thing I can do. I agree.
I just get a feeling it's not going to happen, Lucy. You're going to be around for a lot longer than me, I'm afraid.
Stop. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been lovely talking to you. And thank you, everybody, for listening as well.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks for your brilliant questions. Brilliant comments. Thanks, Barnes and Noble.
I'm loving all this. I have to say, on my screen, all these symbols flying up.
I know, it's wonderful.
Hands and hearts and a cake.
It's great.
Isn't technology wonderful when it's like this? It's so lovely. Lucy, thank you so much. I hope to see you very soon. Hope to be, and I'll do your next one. Well,
gosh, thank you. That would be an honour. And I have to say, for those that bought a ticket that included a twist of the knife with signed book plate, the book will be delivered to you in 8 to 10 business days. And you can also purchase copies of A Twist of the Knife 24/7 on barnesandnoble.com and at your local Barnes and Noble store. Thank you so much, everyone.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye.